So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this talk on how climate change changes society in the age of adaptation by a distinguished speaker, Professor Adil Najam. Adapting to the adverse impacts of climate change is increasingly urgent, as the world is sadly on track to exceed the dangerous 2-degree rise in temperatures, which would have severe consequences for the planet and human society. While some may argue that a focus on adaptation may be seen as accepting defeat or the inevitability of climate change, it is important to recognize that even with aggressive efforts to reduce emissions, climate change is at our doorsteps. The impacts of the climate crisis, from catastrophic floods in Pakistan to extended droughts in the Horn of Africa, are affecting millions worldwide now. Unchecked climate change will push up to 130 million people into poverty over the next 10 years, negating the hard-won development gains of the previous decades. It can cause over 200 million people to migrate within their own countries by 2050. And it can cost the global economy $23 trillion by 2050. So we can see the impacts of climate change and the urgency for action. So we live in a time of great environmental uncertainty. And it is essential that we take action to address climate change. So this lecture provides us with a valuable opportunity to learn from one of the leading voices in the field of climate adaptation and to deepen our understanding of the issues at stake. So with this, I would like to introduce Professor Adil Najam. A quick introduction for him. Adil Najam is the founding dean at the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University, where he's also a professor of international relationships and of Earth Environment. He's also the new president, actually the incoming new president for WWF International, big proud moment. He was previously served as a vice chancellor of the Lahore University of Management Sciences, a leading university in Lahore. Dr. Najam has taught at MIT, the Fletcher School of Law, at Tufts. He's currently a visiting fellow at Oxford University's Wolfson College and the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, and serves as senior advisor to the Jinnah Center for Character and Leadership in Pakistan. He was a lead author for the third and the fourth assessments of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report, which won the Nobel Prize. So I'm sure you have a certificate of Nobel Prize in your room as well. In 2010, he was awarded Sitar-e-Imtiaz, Star of Excellence, one of Pakistan's highest civil awards by the President of Pakistan for services to education and to the environment. Dr. Najam holds 2 masters and a PhD from MIT, and I think a very prestigious engineering degree from the University of Engineering from Pakistan. So the structure of the session will be, we'll have Dr. Adil Najam talk for about 30 minutes. This will be followed by a Q&A. And for those joining online, please submit your questions, and I'll do my best to bring in as many questions as possible. So we are grateful to Professor Adil Najam for sharing his knowledge with us, and to all the participants who've actually taken the first step of being here, because that shows your commitment for finding sustainable solutions for the challenge of climate change. So once again, welcome to this lecture on Age of Adaptation. We look forward to an engaging and informative session. Over to you, Adil.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. Thank you for that embarrassing introduction. As you can see, my greatest skill in life is writing my own CV. But it is truly a pleasure to be here. And thank you all of you who've made it here, and I believe a number of our colleagues who are online. I am looking forward to this conversation, and I hope we have a conversation. But I'm also slightly apprehensive because I've been taking this conversation that you will hear to audiences that are outside of what I do. And that's why I'm excited about it. And I'll say why. I think that climate change today is too important to be left only to climate people. Right? So I'm not a traitor to my community here by saying that. I'm just saying that the issue has become much more than the skills, the training, the frameworks that we who have been working on climate alone have been used to. And I'll sort of spill the beans on one of my major points today. We are carbon obsessed, and climate is no longer climate can no longer be either understood, explained, or acted on only in terms of carbon. But you'll hear more about that. So that's sort of the little mission that I'm on. And as I said, it's not being a traitor to my community. It is just realizing that where we are in this moment of the climate conversation requires a larger tent. And it requires a larger tent, not just that do something about it, but we need different types of frameworks, we need different types of skills and tools and analysis, and so on and so forth. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to take this next sort of 30. I should say one more thing before I do that. For years, Abrar, just like how you started off, I was in the camp that did not want to talk about adaptation. A very dear friend of mine, Salimul Haq, if you don't know him, shame on you. He is Mr. Adaptation. No one person has done more to bring serious thought to adaptation than Salimul Haq is from Bangladesh. But he and I would have these long conversations in the IPCC because he was pushing for adaptation, and my argument was, if we push too hard, it will take people's eyes off mitigation. People will say, well, we don't need to work that hard on reducing carbon. So these two terms you need to know. I'm assuming everyone knows. Mitigation is how do you reduce the problem so that it doesn't happen. Adaptation is if it does happen, what do you do with it, right? And we are good at adaptation. We as a species are here because we are really good at adaptation. We adapted better than most species around us. We keep adapting. We are adapting now. It rains, we carry an umbrella. It is warm, we wear a jacket, right? All of that is adaptation. Adaptation is one of our great skills. But adaptation is always a cost. It's the cost of the umbrella. It's the cost of the jacket. It's the cost of doing something else because you couldn't mitigate, right? And so Salim and I would have these conversations, and I have since moved on to his side. And I wanted to acknowledge that because of what Abrar was saying in the beginning. I want to take these few minutes that I have to raise 3 questions. I promise you, Abrar, I will not answer any of them. If I did, we'll have nothing to talk about. But they're not the type of questions that should be answered. They're the type of questions that we need to keep pondering on. First is, what is the climate telling us? Not what prime ministers and presidents are telling us, not even what science is telling us, but what is the climate out there? It's been a wonderful day today. But what is the climate telling us? Because I don't think we pay enough attention. I'll spill another thing, and I'm going to be instantly unpopular in this room. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of net zero. Because we are making promises in the future and telling the future to just believe us this time. Because we aren't going to do what we did the last time. But I want to talk a bit about what the climate itself is telling us, and that's question 1. Question 2 is, what does it mean to live in this thing that I've been calling for the last 10 years, the age of adaptation? The essential argument is we are now in the age of adaptation. That does not mean that we are out of the age of mitigation. You can chew gum and walk at the same time. In fact, you have to chew gum and walk at the same time. Adaptation is the failure of mitigation, but it is not the opposite of mitigation. The less you mitigate, the more you will have to adapt. I'll talk about this more. By my calculation, about 2 billion people are now living in circumstances where they have to adapt to changing climate for their livelihoods, whether it is in agriculture, food, water, whatever, right? So what does it mean to be in the age of adaptation? And the third is, how is climate change changing how we think about climate change? I know, confusing, right? Because climate change is happening, as opposed to something that is going to happen. I grew up with climate change as something, the big bad wolf that was going to come if you didn't do anything. Well, we didn't do anything. So the big bad wolf is here, and therefore we have to rethink, I would argue, what we mean by climate change policy itself, not climate change science. So those are sort of three big questions that I want you to hold in your mind. I'm going to rush through a lot of slides because I'm a glutton and I want to share as much as I can, but also leave time for our conversation. I have a proposition, and the proposition I have is that the age of adaptation fundamentally changes the nature of climate policy as well as of climate politics. It invites us to reconsider how we conceptualize climate action. Now, that's too many, far more words than should ever be on a slide, so let me highlight what I mean. Here are the things that you can catch me on, because these are bold assertions, and I may well be wrong. It seems to me that change is fundamental. That's fundamental, not that what was has gone away, but something so big has been added, adaptation, that it fundamentally changes how we should think about it. So mitigation hasn't gone away. I want to keep saying that because that's the problem. It changes what? It changes it should change how we think about policy for climate, and it will change what we think about politics. Today, I will not focus much on politics, but I'm happy to do that in Q&A. I think the politics of climate is about to change. It actually probably has changed over the last 2 years from the politics of Hakuna Matata, everyone together, we all love each other, let's give each other a hug, to being far more contentious. As soon as you talk about loss and damage, you're talking about victim and culprit, right? That's not Hakuna Matata land. And mitigation is, let's all come together and do something for everyone's benefit. That's not how adaptation politics necessarily works. But that part I won't say much more about, so that's why I wanted to say. And we need to, I think, reconceptualize, or whether we need to or not, we will be forced to. We are being forced to reconceptualize climate action. Over a phone call with Abrar, we added the word society in that title. I think society is too big a word for me to handle, but we'll keep it in the title for now. So that's kind of the proposition I want to play with and find out from you how we can make it better in that conversation. Let me start just a bit by reminding us of Paris, and I don't like being reminded of Paris. Certainly not in climate terms. I am a climate COP junkie. I was at every climate COP before there was a climate COP. I was at Rio in 1992, I was at the first meetings in 1991, and I was at every climate COP until Copenhagen, which many people think was a failure. I think was the best COP ever because it at least tried. It failed, but it really tried. After that, I put an embargo on myself from never going to COPs. I broke the embargo in Paris, and I regret it. And I haven't been to a COP since then, though I have a feeling my new duties will force me to go there. But let us remind ourselves what happened at Paris. No agreement happened at Paris. A lot of goodwill happened at Paris. I don't want to sound cynical. We had given up on finding an agreement as in a treaty, something that is legally binding. So we had come to this thing, we'll all say what we will do, and we will all believe each other. I'm not being cynical here. We are good people. But we came up with essentially two big numbers. One of them was this number which, if you can think back to Paris, seemed like a very big number then. I remember I used to ask people, what is that number? How many zeros? That's 100 billion. It used to look like a big number in Paris. It seems like a pitiable small number today. Right? The floods in my country, Pakistan, last year, supposedly, depending on who you ask, the cost is between 27 and 50 billion. I think both numbers might be wrong, but so what? 100 billion used to look really big. Now it looks really small. In COVID, if you remember, which was an actual crisis where we acted as if it was a real crisis, in the US where I live, it took the US Congress 7 days to dream up $1 trillion and 5 days to spend it. Up till the end of COVID, or well, there's no end to COVID, but the US printed 6.25 trillion. So our understanding of what is a big number when people actually take a problem seriously has changed. But the thing about 100 billion is 100 billion was never real, and it never shows up. It is never going to show up, though my prediction is at the next COP in a few months, you will suddenly find the rich countries saying, we spent 100 billion, because a lot of my friends are spending their time right now moving around monies and ledgers because sort of the embarrassment of the last COP was very large. But 100 billion does get spent. It doesn't get spent by governments, it gets spent by people. I have a home that gets, the flood comes and my home is destroyed. I don't wait for someone to come and rebuild it. I sell my cow and start building my home back. I take the money I was saving for my daughter's wedding and I start spending it, right? So now this is, I am assuming, good news in some ways, because there is a logic to why after every catastrophe the economy goes up. I assume not many of you follow Pakistan politics, but some Pakistan politics is a mess. But one thing people are talking about is that suddenly the crops this year are very good. They're very good partly because of the floods, right? They're always very good 2 years after the floods because the anyhow, I've gone too much into it. So one was 100 billion. 100 billion didn't show up, but I want you to keep that in mind. The other one is this magical 1.5 to 2. And you noticed how my friend Abrar very smartly didn't even mention 1.5. You are right. No one believed that we were serious about 1.5. And I know of no signs. I wish I am wrong. I hope I am wrong. I will give anything at all, to be wrong on this. But I know of no science that can take us to 1.5 right now. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we keep trying, but the pathway to a real 1.5, I cannot imagine, and I don't think any serious scientist can imagine. Right? And that leaves us at 2, and for many people, not even at 2. Now, some of you might say, what does that mean? 0.5 between friends, why should that matter? But I'll come to that in a little while. I want to remind you of 2020. Anyone remember 2020? How many memos did you read that started where this is a year like no other? I used to be a dean and I used to write those memos every week. This is a year like no other. Thank you for all the hard work you are doing. Right? And so like many of you, I spent my 2020, the year like no other, in front of the biggest thing that happened in 2020. The biggest thing that happened in 2020 was not necessarily COVID, it was Zoom. Which is a tragedy. The only good thing about Zoom is the background. That is me teaching my sustainable development class, where I could put a different background every time depending on what I was talking about. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what else happened in 2020. Right? While we were in front of Zoom, changing our backgrounds and learning this thing, what else was happening? You all remember this. Some of you might have tweeted about it, but not for long. January 2020, hottest January ever. February, second hottest ever. If you remember, at this time, people would tweet about it. February, March, second hottest March ever. April, second hottest April ever. This is in 2020. Most of these have been broken since then. May, hottest ever. June, hottest ever recorded. July, second hottest ever. So you see the pattern. August, second hottest. September, hottest. October, third hottest. November, hottest. December, you get a respirator. You get the 8th hottest. I haven't really done the math, but as far as I can think about it, about half of those have since been broken. About midway in the year, we stopped noticing because this had become sort of a regular routine. Right? This is the age of adaptation. The point is, this is no longer about what is going to happen. This is about what is happening. Let me give you another. That was 2021. This is a tweet I did on 29th of April 2022. And essentially calculated that on that day, nearly 1 billion people, 1 billion, across South Asia, where I come from, were seeing temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and in some cases 117. South Asia is used to heat. We can live with that. That should not be happening in April. That should not be happening in April to 1 billion people. What happened last week in Bangladesh and parts of India should not be happening. What is about to happen, it seems, in European summer should not be happening, right? And again, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm essentially saying, remember those predictions of the future? The future is here, right? That's the age of adaptation. That I had made, actually, you will see that I have no graphs anymore about the future. I used to do, like every climate person, graphs that went to 2100, 2200, 2150. And then I started realizing that when I put those graphs, people think we have time. People think we're talking about the future. So let me show you what's been happening to world temperature. You've probably seen this. This is actual data for every month since we have data for every month. This is not prediction, this is not projection, this is actual recorded data, right? 78, 92, 95, it will end sort of slightly before where we are, 2016. It would touch yellow at the 1.5. Touching the line doesn't mean we are there on average, right? But the numbers are pretty stark. Now you would say that is fine, but I don't live on the whole planet. I live on a part of the planet called Oxford, or wherever it is, right? So choose wherever you are. Same data for all the places where we have temperature for. This is not future prediction. This is actual recorded data, right? So again, if you look at that 1912, 1918, 1929, 31, what we've done is we've plotted that for all the places we have, and you see the change in temperature. Now one can play with the colors, and probably we do play with the colors, but what you're trying to see here is the progression. Anyone who is under 44 years of age in this room, and I assume most people are, anyone who is under 44 years of age in this room has never in their life seen a cooler than average year. Right? So all of this, I know I'm sounding like sort of a scaremonger. I'm not trying to scare. All I'm trying to say, by the preponderance of the evidence, is that something has shifted. Adaptation is not a future challenge or a future opportunity. It is a current one. And therefore, if we are working on climate change, we can no longer only be doing mitigation. We must do mitigation, but we must start also looking immediately at this age of adaptation. I talked about sort of the 1.5 and the big sort of what's the magic of 1.5. Most of you probably know this story. The story of 1.5 was no one wanted 1.5 amongst the big countries. And then the smaller countries, the island states, the vulnerable countries said, by 2, we are underwater. And so they started pushing for 1.5, and therefore the language is, we will try for 1.5. Right? That is why Abrar didn't mention it, but we knew, and Abrar knew, and I knew, no one would try. It's not easy to try, but here is the difference amongst friends in that 0.5. 0.5 seems like sort of a nothingness, right? Between this morning and now, the weather has changed by far more than that. But the difference between weather and climate, and again, all of you know this is the IPCC report on what it means at 1.5, but the difference between 1.5 and 2 is that extreme heat increases by 2.5 times, 250%, if the global temperature changes by that much, right? Sea ice in the Arctic, 10 times worse. Species loss, 2 times worse. Right? So this is again from the IPCC, and the point is that once you are meddling with the thermostat of the globe, a 0.5 degree change is a big change, right? And so that is the type of sort of what I think the climate is telling us. And the climate is telling us, guys, you're in the age of adaptation, so take adaptation seriously. Now, adaptation might also have opportunities, but it also has a whole bunch of costs. What does the age of adaptation look like? I'll go through this fast, but I should also put the caveat. I work mostly on developing countries, so most of this is developing countries. I leave it to you to translate it to your environment. In every environment, it is in fact relevant. So the point here is adaptation is here. Adaptation is now. The question is, can we use the age of adaptation to actually also make some wise choices? Right? And what changes in the age of adaptation? Brad mentioned the WWF, which I'm very, very, very proud and honored and humbled by, but none of what I'm saying represents the WWF. I haven't taken the position yet. But there is a reason why I first start with nature, because we don't think enough about nature. Right? Because our language of climate is carbon-based. Right? So what I mean by carbon-based is essentially our language of climate policy is carbon-based, meaning energy-based. Right? If you are interested in managing carbon, you're really interested in managing energy, and you should. But what that means is once we become obsessed with that, there are things we don't see. One of them is nature. I like this picture rather than the picture my WWF friends often put, which is the polar bear on the ice slab. Anyone seen that picture? It's a beautiful picture, but it's not really true. Because it kind of makes you feel the polar bear is waiting for you to come and help it. I have spoken to a few polar bears. They are not waiting. They have no faith in you or me because they see nothing in our history that would give them the sense that we would come and save them. This, I think, is a truer depiction of what nature does. When nature is in trouble, you hit back. Right? And in that way, the truer description actually is not that, but this beautiful creature. That's the dengue mosquito. Right? And that is why a lot of sort of climate scientists have been working a lot on what is happening to vector-borne disease. Right? Because when adaptation happens, it is not just you and me who have to adapt. It is every species that is adapting, and many species are much better than us at adapting. Right? So again, not a single cause, there's never a single cause, but there is something odd when you start getting dengue, not only in Lahore, Pakistan, but in Gilgit, Pakistan, at the foothills of the Himalayas. Right? Dengue mosquito is something you would have expected in Sri Lanka, near the equator. But both in South Asia and in the Mediterranean, you see it moving upwards. Now, there are again epidemiologically many reasons. For example, people travel more, things move with my shoes, and so on and so forth. But species also adapt. Right? And having gone through a pandemic, not that I'm suggesting there is one in the waiting, but that is why, for example, in the age of adaptation, we should be thinking not only how we adapt, but how other ecosystems will adapt. Probably the language and the most important thing about adaptation I want to say is water. I would argue, if you remember anything from this talk, whether you like it or not, but if you remember anything from this talk, it is this thing that I've been harping on, which is water is to adaptation what carbon is to mitigation. Just like carbon was essential language for mitigation, because that's the enterprise, reduce carbon so that emissions go down. Water is the essential, not the only one, just like carbon was not the only one. At least in the beginning, water is a primary language of adaptation. What do I mean about that? Adaptation happens when you have impacts, right? So imagine what the impacts of climate change are. Not all, but lots of them are very wet. What happens when climate changes? Water rises, sea level rise. What happens when climate changes? Water disappears, drought. Water melts, glaciers. Water falls from the sky like no one's business, extreme events. Right? So suddenly water policy becomes the forefront of climate policy at about the same level as energy policy has. Right? And that partly answers this question. That those of us who are working on climate change have been energy obsessed, rightly. Now we have to eat, chew gum and walk at the same time. Now we have to think about water policy. And there may be opportunities there. In fact, I am convinced there are opportunities there. Right? But a lot of it becomes about water. That little blue dot on the planet, by the way, was all the fresh water in the world, which, by the way, is enough. I want to share this picture. This is something I had done, not this floods, but the last floods. So there was a 2010 major floods in Pakistan. And at that time, I and friends were sort of trying to raise support and money for people who had been affected. Those floods had covered slightly less area than the current floods. But here is what I want to sort of just share with you. What I had found was it was difficult to explain what a flood is in a South Asian context. So if you look at that map, that blue area is moderately and severely affected by the flood, which means your home is underwater, right? And you're on the roof. So keep in your mind that blue squiggle, right? So I took that squiggle, this is for your geography friends, and put it on a map of the US to scale. And that's what it covered, from up in Vermont to Florida. I put it on a map of Japan. You don't see Japan. I put it on a map of Europe, from Denmark down to France. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we think about climate and its impacts, the reason those numbers become so large is because those impacts are at a very large scale. I gave a talk this morning on living in this at the Smith School, so I won't repeat that, but this is some work that I and colleagues are doing in trying to sort of think about what it would take to make water the central part of climate policy, in addition to carbon. Now, if, in fact, water is central, then immediately food is central. Because what is food except nature's way of packaging water? I'm sorry, I know it's not exactly that. Right? But it's a very important component of it. And it is so obvious that I won't even go into that. I'm just putting those things. We talk about energy, but energy doesn't become irrelevant in the age of adaptation. It becomes central in different ways. And that is why that picture of energy is very different from the type of pictures you usually put about energy. It's not a windmill. It's not a solar panel. Right? It's about energy poverty. So you continue to have, as you mitigate and bring renewables and so on and so forth at high cost very often, an increasing need to also be addressing energy poverty for large numbers of people. Right? So again, the type of things you think about energy and climate become different. In many ways, I worry much less about energy than anything else, because I think, thanks to the type of work many people do here, that story is kind of written. There is a transition happening. It cannot be stopped. It can be accelerated. I hope it will be accelerated. But it is real. But that story nearly never talks about energy poverty, which is why I was saying the politics of climate is going to become much more contentious than not. This was a report by Irina on the future of energy security that I was part of, but I wouldn't go into it for time reasons. Mobility, which we talk a lot about. Right? How does it change? Mobility, the picture to put on mobility is a Tesla. Right? That's not a Tesla. Tesla is not making anything like that. The mobility problem for very large numbers of people looks like that. Right? There is, I hope, again, an opportunity in thinking about that. Because Tesla, again, is a problem that I don't think has been solved, but there is a lot of momentum for. So you can catch that train. Please do catch that train. But there's another train, literally a train, in the middle of that also needs to be caught, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that these issues take on different forms. Infrastructure. You have a beautiful building, but there's a different infrastructure problem. There are also different infrastructure solutions. My favorite example is Kathmandu. People who've been to Kathmandu, Nepal, one of the most fascinating things about Kathmandu, Nepal, it's up in the Himalayas. 1/3 of households have solar hot water heating. In Kathmandu? right? And it's been working for 15 to 20 years. Not out of environmental reasons, but just because it is cost effective. Right? So there are multiple opportunities, but it's a different type of opportunity than that cutting edge lead and lead plus building opportunity that we think about infrastructure. I won't even go into ecosystems. I'm highlighting and I'm behind time and want to wrap up soon, but one of my favorite is the wrong term. This one worries me a lot. Heat. Right? Many climate scientists will talk to you and say that that's the thing that surprised. You know, the surprises in this climate science, not that something happened that wasn't expected, but something happened that at a much larger scale than people thought. One of them is heat, and the other is actually the heating of ocean waters. And if you've seen the data from the last 2 weeks, it's really, really disturbing. But heat is amazing. In Karachi, in Pakistan, we used to have 4 seasons, now we have 5. The 5th season is called intense heat. For the last 7 years straight, and it's not just Karachi, it's that whole belt that starts from Karachi, goes into India, into New Delhi, and so on and so forth. You have this period when intense heat is going to take hundreds of lives, 400, 500. And at this point, 400, 500 people dead are not going to make the news. Right? Again, the reason this worries me the most is you're going to continue seeing this pattern. This is very clearly a poverty problem as much as a climate problem, but therefore also at the bottom of the pyramid. Am I using your language right? Prahalad type stuff, right? There are opportunities. The pictures we see with heat, this is for major cities in Pakistan. The data is just unavoidable, but the pictures are avoidable. Right? The solutions are essentially right up there in front of you. The solutions are hydration. This should not be a picture that you should be seeing. This should not be a picture you should be seeing. I'm going to move that. The next one really should not be a picture. Mass graves. 5 years running. Not just in, this one is in Karachi, but also in Delhi. Right? Because the people dying are mostly homeless on the street. Right? So the point I'm saying is, these are not things we think about when we think about climate change. This is a much more depressing talk than it was meant to be. But let me, I don't think I'm going to make it less depressing here, but let me get to some of the solutions in my last slide. So what does rethinking mean? Why am I suggesting this, doing this to you? Good people who have found time on a wonderfully beautiful day to come and listen to me. Why am I putting these things in front of you? Because if we are going to rethink, then we're going to rethink by different people in different ways. At least 4 ways that it seems to me we need to start thinking about this. One is, and this should have been clear by now, I hope, thinking about climate, we've usually thought about climate as mostly energy, and moving to think about climate as nearly everything else. Right? And again, if I'm an entrepreneur, there might be opportunities of, okay, what can I do about that other infrastructure question? What is the value at the bottom of the pyramid on water? Right? What is the devices on extreme heat now that someone can actually tell you that season of extreme heat is going to happen for about 250 million people every year? Right? That's predictability. So one is moving from thinking about climate as mostly energy to climate as nearly everything, including energy, but not simply focused on carbon. Thinking, this one I'm not fully sure of, so I'm seeking your help. A lot of climate thinking in terms of policy and action is about minimizing bad behavior. Right? I think in the age of adaptation, because it continues happening, we need to apply our faculties to maximizing good behavior. I was going to write that slide as minimizing bads and maximizing goods, but goods is such a lousy word, right? Because bads are goods, and just because they're called goods. But this notion again of maximizing good behavior particularly becomes important in adaptation, because in mitigation you are trying to take something bad and remove it. Adaptation is a continuous, right? Because climate is non-reversible. So what you are trying to do is a continuous improvement, which means maybe longer-term clients and people. Third, and as I said, there are 4. this again is my IR hat, so I won't go too much into it. Moving from thinking international to global. I know it sounds goody two shoes and all that. But international means that climate policy has been the domain of countries. Countries are going to come together, and countries are going to talk and decide for everyone. That has failed. It is not that people are bad, because that doesn't match the problem. The assumption of a country-based international negotiation is you will come and do what is best for your country, because you're a diplomat from your country. She's going to do what's best for her country. And when we add it up, we will somehow come to what is best for everyone. Right? Just the logic of it doesn't work. The logic is simply that you will get to the lowest common denominator. Right? That's the logic of expanding the actors. Maybe including to business, maybe including to civil society, I do not know how. But we know that the interstate thing doesn't work. And finally, moving from thinking of adaptation as a problem to thinking about adaptation as an opportunity. Thank you so much. My apologies for being all over the place and taking too long, but I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adil. That was a, I would say, fascinating talk that took us from, across the entire world. And, it was, actually, I was most fascinated seeing the Zoom backgrounds as well. And I can see you're an early adopter because it took us such a long time to actually figure out what they were. But thank you so much. So we have about 20 minutes, and I wanted to open up for questions, And so any questions here? All right, so how about we'll start with you, and then let's take a few. So
I'm going to get a piece of paper, please. Go ahead.
I think it'll be easier, and we can see if there's certain themes coming out.
Thank you. Let me introduce me. I'm the head, actually, of climate resilience and food systems in IDRC, the Canadian International Development Research Centre, that we have worked for many years together.
Yes.
I have a question on how we match the urgency of climate action with enough information. So we have launched recently with the UK and Canada $100 million on research and adaptation. But that research is going to come in 4, 5, 6 years to the community. And that's the research. Reaching the community is going to take another 6, 7. Then we are in 10 years from now, we are already in a 1.7 scenario. How we match those two agendas? That would be a question. And then you mentioned the moving to global actors as the key element. What is the governance of that system of global actors?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's take a question from there. Yes. Oh, okay.
Hello, my name is Bilal. I am from Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, University of Oxford. My question is particularly with the focus of Pakistan. Like recently, the government has initiated Living Indus initiative, which you are also a part of. But how do you think the government is going to take that initiative further, given the fact that as a nation we are not on the same page regarding the construction of Karabakh Dam? And my second question is, how do you see the current government change in Afghanistan is going to affect the water policy in Afghanistan? Because let's say if they build a dam on Kabul River, then how it's going to affect the overall water distribution within Indus River? Because we are always feared about India building a dam on some of the Indus tributaries, but we have never think of Afghanistan building a dam on Kabul River. Thank you so much.
I'll take one more from here.
I'm going to build on the climate adaptation question and the one about timelines. So to give a little more color of what you were talking about, I'm from a place called Lucknow in India. I do not remember not getting a heat stroke in the summer since I was 12 in that place. And it's very close to all of the places you spoke about. And I think my question is, adaptation is great. Adaptation and mitigation, wherever we can find solutions that do both, is really where we need to be putting our money. But what also scares me is the amount of focus on direct air capture, because it just allows polluting industries to thrive for longer. But is it also something that we need to get behind to be able to protect the most vulnerable places that are affected by heat right now? And what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel very conflicted.
Perfect. So let me I think one question is really looking at this kind of research lag gap, right? We're getting knowledge, but we need action right now. I think the other, it is focused on Pakistan and Afghanistan, but let's kind of take it broader. Like, how do you think about these kind of cross-border resource challenges?
Yeah.
And I think many, many countries share that. So if you could talk a little bit about kind of this common challenge, and then finally we're looking at some of the mitigation aspects, like, is this philosophy of direct capturing or mitigation really impacting how we think about adaptation?
Thank you for those questions. Those are really great questions. And when someone says it's a great question, that means they have no answer. They're just fishing for time. So I don't. But thank you for the IDRC link. Indeed, it's a wonderful organization that I've had the pleasure of doing many things with. How do we match urgency and information? You're going to hear this on all three questions. We try our best, but we don't stop if we can't match them. Right? And what that means is we do a lot of things in life without full information. And we sometimes make information an excuse. Policymakers do, and so on and so forth. Right? So if you just think of your life and how many things, including falling in love with people or marrying people and so on and so forth, that we end up doing without full information, I think we can do some of climate policy on the same. I'm not trying to be facetious. But what I'm saying is, when problems are great, think about COVID. Right? We put on masks well before we knew what they were going to do. We started distancing the day after we first heard of it. I have a separate presentation on COVID and what it teaches about climate change, and it teaches many things. When you actually believe that something is existential, you behave in a very different way. Money shows up, you can act with uncertainty, and therefore I do not believe people when they say that climate is existential, because our behavior doesn't match that. So what that means in real terms is that we recognize the urgency and we recognize the lack of information, but we do not make the second an excuse not to do the first. I have an unpublished article in my computer for many years, which argues that that IPCC should be abandoned. IPCC should declare victory and go home. I don't publish it because that would make me sound like a denier. I'm not a denier. I think this idea that we need more science is giving breathing space to policymakers. Because you can always ask for more science, and that is what we love, right? That final paragraph we write in our papers. We need more science, especially the type I do. Please give me more money. Right? So how we deal with urgency is important. On the urgency, this is a serious point, and it will go to the other points too. On urgency, not every climate action needs to be immediate. No, the action needs to be immediate, but we need to have an appetite for longer term things. If we look at our personal behavior, I do think that I sometimes tend towards that which I can do immediately and makes me feel like I'm doing something about climate, even if it is not the most important thing to do. A bunch of recycling is like that. And I will delay that which has a longer tail. Right? So we need to unpack both the urgency and the information. Urgency in the sense that just because something can be done quickly and I can be seen to be a good actor doesn't mean it's the most important thing I can do. We very often in our personal lives, in our institutional lives, postpone deep, meaningful action because it doesn't have an immediate payoff. Not politicians do that, but individuals do that, companies do that. I'll relate this, the other shall be shorter. I'm going to disappoint Bilal. Dams are amongst the least important things you can do about water. If you want to build them, go and build them, please. I was trained as an engineer, civil engineers, I'll help you. And it's not going to do much. So I think dams are a political issue. Dams are important. I'm not saying they're not important, and I'm not saying they don't have problems or solutions. But the politics of dams, particularly in our part, is hollow politics like nearly everything else. Right? I sometimes think if you change the name of Kalabagh Dam to Safed Bagh or something, we would solve it. There is a lot that we need to do about water after it enters Pakistan. So living in this is saying, okay, let's leave the transboundary aside for a minute. I'm not saying it's not important. But let's at least do what we can do there. I'm glad you're giving me this. Pakistan is the Indus Basin, right? Pakistan is the Indus Basin. 90% of Pakistanis, 230 million Pakistanis, 90% live on the Indus Basin. 85% of Pakistan's economy is on the Indus Basin. 9 out of the 9 largest cities in Pakistan are within 50 kilometers of the Indus Basin. Now, none of others may not be interested in Indus, but what we are trying with this Indus thing is, can we change climate policy from climate obsession to things that people can recognize? Heat stroke in Lucknow. Indus that used to flow near my house and now doesn't, right? And can that create that space? So that would be my thing. Now, there is a transboundary thing. There's a huge transboundary thing. It's in the smog in Lahore. It's in the carbon molecule that travels all over and so on and so forth. But that's a separate question from simply the dams problem. Afghanistan, thank you very much. You're exactly right. The Indus flows the Kabul River from Afghanistan. We can talk about it later on that. On your last question on Lucknow, I really don't know the answer, but it's a very good question. I mean, I say that honestly. I do think that one sensible way of thinking about mitigation and adaptation is not how much adaptation do you do and how much mitigation do you do, but who does a lot of adaptation and who does a lot of mitigation. Right? I want Pakistan not to do coal. I want Pakistan to do wind and solar, but Pakistan is what, 0.1% of global emissions. We can bring it to 0, it's not going to, right? So there is a set of countries, vulnerable countries in particular, where I think the focus should be on adaptation. There is another set of countries and people, right? So it's not sort of, what we get into, how much mitigation and how much, it's not like cooking, how much salt and how much pepper. It is who does this dish and who does that dish. And that distinction of responsibility is something that the cops should talk about. The early cops did talk about it. Now they don't, or they don't as much.
So we have a lot of questions actually coming online as well. So let me pick one question and then I'll go back to the audience. And that maybe is related to my research as well, and it's on the top. But I think one thing that we're also seeing in climate finance, and this is also relevant to where we are sitting in the business school, is that despite a lot of this interest, there's still majority of funding that goes towards mitigation. So how can adaptation focus be enhanced in the financial world as well? How do we make that case? We understand it here, but what's the conversation if we had, imagine, bankers sitting here or the state bank officials sitting here?
I'm thinking there are bankers sitting here. There should be at least a few bankers, future ones, if not one. Can I take that question before the others very quickly?
Yeah.
I think that again gives us an opportunity to think somewhat differently. And you've probably caught the drift of this. So I don't want to get into the debate of mitigation gets too much money, how can I get hold of some of that and move it to adaptation? I don't want to do that. Please keep spending on mitigation what you're spending on mitigation. I want new money for adaptation. Right? Now, I understand. You are all much more pragmatic people, so you say, where does it come from? And I was having a chat with a mutual friend of ours, Adnan Qadir, the other day on this. I think so I don't want to take away money from mitigation, because the less mitigation you do, the more adaptation will you do. And I don't want climate person fighting climate person. That's not the point. So the question is, where does new adaptation money come from? Or where does smart adaptation money come from? Because it's not new. I think it comes from what I was saying in my last slide, thinking about adaptation as if it is development. All development money should be adaptation. And I'm not being bombastic here. Show me a good adaptation project, I will show you a good development project. Right? So let us put meaning into this thing called sustainable development. Some of you might understand where I come from, we have a word called khudda line. Khudda line is things that you put on the side, no one takes important. Climate and adaptation is that, it's an afterthought. Right? I'll do my proposal, I'll do my plan, and then I will add a little thing about 3 solar panels and 5 windmills. If you do development policy by making adaptation a central goal, just like growth is, for example, you will, I am convinced, do development better and adaptation better. I mean, think about what do you do for adaptation, right? You do better cities. How is that not development? What do you do for adaptation? You do livable communities. That is development. So again, I may be being simplistic here, but I think we need to sort of think more radically, not by saying, I'm envious of mitigation, let me grab that money, but saying, can I restructure, not even if it's new money, smartly development money to be adaptation?
Wonderful. We'll take a few more questions. Okay, let me go to Thomas. And let's take three. One from here. Anyone from this side as well? Any questions? Yes, and we'll take one from here as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm currently an MBA student, but previously I was at HSBC. My last couple of years.
So we do have bankers.
Oh no! I was in the climate scenario analysis team, and one of the things that was a really big focus before I left was climate adaptation planning at client level, consumer level. So my question is, around that, what do you think companies at a company level need to put into these plans to make more informed decisions in terms of adaptation?
Okay. Carolina?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for this presentation. So my name is Carolina, I'm from Sweden originally, and one thing that really worries me a lot is that in developed countries there is a lot of fear against what will happen when we reach 1.5 and we reach degrees. And in Sweden, at least, it's a country where a lot of people are very aware of climate change and very worried. But what happened in the last election that we had was that people have they have this perception that we have failed, and thus we will vote for very nationalist policies that will only protect Sweden. And they have the recent government has just put in place actually cut developing finance by half because they no longer want to spend money on developing countries. And that is a big fear for me, and I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on that question.
Perfect. I will take one more from here. I think
Thank
they're
you
just.
so much, Professor Najam. It's really very impressive talk. I have a couple of questions, sorry, but I'll just put here, going back to IPCC. So there's a sort of a fundamental issue there in terms of who you blame. Is it the producer or the consumers? And second thing, just going back to the title of the talk here, like society. So somehow we are ignoring the fact of the responsibility coming to individuals rather than the governments. And the third thing is just sort of, I think just going back to my colleague talking about Afghanistan, now it's again about the money. So if you are a more powerful country, you can use cloud seeding. This means you can harvest water of other country. So how would you see it? Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. So maybe just, I know there are lots of varied questions, but I think one question was coming like, how do you bring adaptation within company planning? I think the other question is like this push towards nationalism. Because of this fear that we need to protect ourselves, we can't take care of the global element. I think some of these questions, like a question here is, what about technologies that can really help us if we have financing?
Or hurt some, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take it in reverse order. I hope, sir, I did not sound like I'm blaming the IPCC. The IPCC has been very good to me. I actually do have one of those things in my office for the third and fourth. So everyone in IPCC is my friend. I'm not blaming them at all. I'm just saying when declare victory, they've done what they were supposed to do. Right? And I'm not even, I haven't published the article because I understand how it will be taken and this has just proved it. But IPCC has been one of the greatest scientific experiments we've had. But you also need to know when to close things. Right? Its job is done. We can do other things to continue the science. Let's not give the politician an excuse to keep. So I'm certainly not against IPCC. I'm a big fan. I'm a cheerleader. On technologies like the one, and this will go back to the Sweden question also. So yes, I don't want to comment on particular technologies. There are many. There is a lot of geoengineering questions here. That's a separate talk. I remain on the fence on geoengineering because that's how we got into a lot of problems by going into half-baked things. Some geoengineering has always happened, and many will. So I don't want to get specific into that beyond that. I'm still trying to understand it better. But your central point there that money matters is an important one. Right? Why is it that whenever we have calamities, climatic or otherwise, the stories we hear is about poor people? Right? So is climate anti-poor? Is nature anti-poor? Right? It probably is. But what really happens is, it's not that nature is saying, I'll go and hit the poor people's house with the flood. It is that the house that's in the way of the flood is the poor person's. Because you and I built our houses because we could afford them. Elsewhere, I often give the example of earthquakes. They're not about climate change. But no one ever dies in an earthquake. You don't die because of the earthquake. You die because the ceiling falls on your head. And the ceiling falls on your head because the ceiling was weak. Which is why when hurricanes happen in North America where I live, they come to Haiti and the newspaper tells you how many people died. Same hurricane comes to Florida, it tells you what the economic loss was. That's a good thing. It's good to be rich. So one of the challenges here that is a nightmare is that as climate change starts happening, some of us will be able to buy our way out of it. Right? Just the way we buy our way out of floods, by not being in the way. Right? And that is worrisome to the Hakuna Matata thing. So when I said politics is going to get dirty, because as long as we all think this is about all of us, there may be a chance for collective action. Once I start figuring out, I can opt out of this, I can go to Mars, or I can build my house to be earthquake proof and so on and so forth, and I believe some of it is beginning to happen. I don't know Swedish politics very well, but I was in Uppsala 2 weeks ago, and was in a lot of conversations with folks, and a bunch of them were about that election. And my friend Ashok Swain, who's at the conflict program in the University of Uppsala, kept telling me that he was surprised that climate was not even an issue in the elections. Right? So we see these numbers about which countries are most concerned. Sweden is on top of it and doesn't become an issue. And you're seeing that in multiple countries, including this one. Right? And partly because other issues become more important, whether it is nationalism or whatever. And the point about the way you framed it is climate and nationalism can actually come pretty close pretty quickly. Right? My climate for me. Now the molecule doesn't see that, but if you go back to my earthquake and building fortress world, now no one has taken this on. This is one of the other reasons I'm not always a fan of net zero. Right? I will climate proof my city. Right? Which is net zero is not about climate proofing, it is about emissions. But you go for one more step, and this thing that people have written about fortress world. We will build fortresses around us. The last one on HB, I don't know, but I'm very glad they were working on adaptation. The silly part of me, because I don't know this world very well, that's why I'm here to learn from you, thinks that there is a Prahalad type bottom of the pyramid set of solutions. But I don't think that's the extent of it, right? I think that's very simplistic. That's sort of micro-insurance. People talk about micro-insurance and that sort of things. But there may be, and I'm speculating entirely, maybe adaptation as investment opportunities. If my adaptation as development argument is correct, right? Because it's a long-term play, there is a long-term payoff, right? I cut carbon, that is usually a cost. Right? I have to minimize something, I take a hit because my customer wants it or whatever. But are there plays, you will have to find those, are there plays which start looking as adaptation as development? Right? One area that comes to mind is agriculture. But I don't have enough cells in my brain to come to it, so I'm waiting for you to do that.
Perfect. Well, I would have loved to ask. There were so many more questions, but I'm also conscious of time. We've gone 5 minutes over. So on that note, we'll officially...
My apologies for going on and on.
Officially close the talk, but there are refreshments outside, and for the ones that are here, can continue this conversation outside. Once again, thank you so much, Professor Adil Najam, for this talk. And thank you, everyone. I know, it's a great day outside, so you've actually given 1 hour, and I hope that shows everyone's commitment towards climate action. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.